There can only be one emperor. There's only one in a part of the world. If somebody else says they're emperor, you must fight to the death. Somebody has to die, the other one wins, and then there's one emperor again. That's the way the system works, and it worked the same way in Europe, the Roman Empire, and the subsequent things. Now, however, Japan, since 600 AD, when Japan first got organized with these Korean kind of warlords controlling different areas of Japan, and the guy in Nara, based in Nara City, which later moved to Kyoto City, close by, that guy defeated the other ones around central Honshu Island of Japan. He defeated the others, and so he called them kings, even though they were not. They were just kind of warlord nobles, let's say, but he called them kings, and then he said he himself is the emperor over all those kings. He used that word, and he said, I'm emperor of the Japanese islands. And different parts of the Japanese islands, it's kingdom, 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 kingdom. I'm the emperor of Japanese islands. It's okay, he can say that, use any title he wants, but the very first time, around 600 AD, when the first guy to really hold that throne in Kyoto sent a letter, kind of diplomatic letter to China with this, with his title and introducing himself and hoping for good relations. And the Chinese looked at this and they said, Emperor? Hell no, you are not. You are King of Japan. Stop using that word. Do not use that word, because you know it'll happen. And they never did. Japan kept using that word. For now, 1400 years, they still use that word. They still say they have an emperor in Japan. They're the only country in the world that uses that word anymore. Everybody else stopped. Even places like Ethiopia that were using it for Central Africa, or certainly in Europe, everybody stopped using that word in the world because of what it means. It means you are the master, and other countries nearby you should be your slaves, that they are under you. Japan is the only country in the world still using that. Still saying emperor, and it still annoys China. China doesn't like that until now. This has been 1400 years of this. China keeps telling Japan on and on, all through history, saying, stop using that word. King of Japan, please. And this goes on. Now, why didn't China send a 1,000,000-man army to punish Japan for this, like right away, right after 600 or any time for the next? I just showed you the isolation. China never had much of a navy until 1400. And then only a very short time they had a great super navy, but then they stopped and they took it apart. All through history, China never was an ocean-going power. The farthest they went was like the Philippines or down the coast of Vietnam, maybe touching the Malay Peninsula. Otherwise, not much of a navy, just coastal ships, fishing ships, such. China was a mainland power. They never developed the kind of navy they would need, big ships and heavy ocean, because again, those waters around Japan are really dangerous. You'd need really, really good ships to go to Japan and punish them and do that. They never could. So this has just been a thing where for 1400 years, China's just angry and accusing them, and the Japanese just say, ha ha, we're on islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and you can't touch us. Yep. Now, Korea always sided with China on this. Korea always agreed that the emperor is in China. And when the Japanese would send over diplomats and emissaries, the Koreans often pointed out, they said, well, you're a king of Japan. Your master is the king of Japan. Please tell him to use that title. He's not an emperor. They would look down on this and Koreans generally stood with China on this, and they still do today. It still comes down to today as far as weird one, all right. This has been a diplomatic problem, and it is still the problem. Japan and China, still today, like in the United Nations, in international format, both say they are the leader of Asia, East Asia, the most important country in East Asia, and you must listen to me as such, and the other one says no, and you be quiet. They don't like each other. They're diplomatic enemies, and if it wasn't for the U.S. and United States military over here, Japan and China already would have been in World War III quite a while ago, and perhaps they're still waiting for the chance. Other reasons, pirate attacks on Korea's south coast. Japan being a bunch of islands, having a whole bunch of fishing ships, coastal ships and such, but then a centralized government in the middle of Honshu Island. Outside on the islands, not much government control, never was. There were pirates, there were illegal towns, villages there with men who would get up on these fishing ships and use that to go over to Korea and attack the coast around Busan, Jinhae, up through a little bit on the east coast and across the south coast. They would attack places and kidnap women, steal any money or artworks, raid Buddhist temples, try to steal the rice or anything they could steal, really, and then take it back to their pirate towns. This happened all the time ever since Japan got started, really. This was a problem. The Koreans hated it. Koreans kept sending messages to Japan when they had the chance to this king of Japan, calling himself the emperor, and saying, would you stop this? Would you stop those pirates from attacking Korea? And the guy in Kyoto always said, oh, of course I will stop it, but really there's nothing I can do. They are very far from our capital, and Japan did not have a navy, any kind of navy force anyway. These small islands off the coast of Japan, people could just do whatever they wanted to do. There was very little government control. This is true, and they never wanted to assert any control. They just didn't control it. Even in 700, we have some old myths, old stories from the Samguk Yusa. There are two different stories that show, it's all Buddhist mysticism and shamanism, magic talk, but it shows that the Koreans already, by 700 AD, thought of Japan as a threatening enemy. Japan was a problem, and they needed Buddhist defense, they needed magical, godly defense, always pointing to the southeast. So these various stories, and these go on through Korean culture. But as early as 700 already, Japan was a problem of this. They were attacking us, and we need protection. Then, get all the way up to the 1200s, the Mongols. You know, Genghis Khan, all that. They conquered Japan. No, they didn't. They did not conquer Japan. They conquered Korea. They conquered China, the great Chinese Empire, and they conquered all through the Central Asia, all the way out to Damascus, Syria, Baghdad, Iraq. They conquered most of the known world, most of the civilized world, except like they never got to Egypt or to Europe. They almost got to Europe. They got to what is today Hungary, the country of Hungary. They got near Budapest city. I just visited Czech Republic, and there was a place they had a battle with the Mongols out in the eastern side of the Czech Republic. I mean, they were that close to taking over Europe, but then they didn't. But they never took Japan, but they wanted to. Japan was the only thing in Asia, really, except the deepest jungle of Southeast Asia, the only thing they didn't take, and they wanted to. And in 1284, on Jeju-do, Korea's Jeju Island, for a couple decades, they were breeding horses, growing horses, more Mongol ponies, and those Mongol horses are still on Jeju today. They're a tourist attraction. Tourists ride them. They're still there. And they raised a big army with Koreans as slaves to work the ships and be the lowest level soldiers, and Mongols would be the leaders and all that. They put out 400 ships, some of them really pretty big, full of men and horses and armor, 400 ships, and they headed for Japan. and they almost got to Japan. They almost got to the shore, and then a typhoon came up. Just luck. Just luck, just bad luck. Good luck for the Japanese, bad luck for the Mongols. A typhoon came up out of nowhere between there, and they were close enough the Japanese could see them. They could see 400 ships coming, and they knew, okay, we're finished. My God, those are Mongols. Oh, hell. And such. Then a typhoon comes up and swamped all 400 ships. All the Mongols died, all the Koreans died. Every one of them. But dead bodies just washed up on the Japanese beaches with the wreckage. And the Japanese were just going, oh, hell. That's the best good luck ever. The Japanese called that kamikaze, the wind of the spirits, the spirit wind. And later in World War II, famously, they used this for suicide pilots flying at American ships, called them the kamikaze pilots, the spirit wind that they hoped would save Japan again. All through history, because of this, no country ever invaded Japan. Ever since the Koreans got Japan going, around 500 or so, no country ever did invade or conquer Japan. Japan is just too isolated. No country could. Okay, well, Korea is the only one close enough, and Korea never was a big, super strong country with a big navy to do that. And nobody ever did in all of history, finally, until 1945. And General MacArthur defeated Japan and then went to Tokyo and walked onto Japan as the very first conqueror ever in Japanese history. And that was super, super deep, shocking to the Japanese that could ever even happen. The other thing here, trade issues. Again, because of the isolation, Korea is the only country Japan could trade with. And when Korea was angry at Japan or didn't like Japan, they could cut off trade. They could say, okay, no ships coming in here, nothing allowed, and then Japan had nobody to trade with. They just had themselves, and they were doing okay themselves, okay, but they really wanted to trade. They had products. When the road was open, like at the best of times in Korea's first golden age, 600 to 800 AD, the Silk Road was open, and traders from Syria and Lebanon were coming all the way across Central Asia to all the way through China and coming to Korea. And they were trading goods like spices from the Middle East. They were trading right here in the Shilla capital of Gyeongju, and ships from there traded with Japan. Brought in Japanese products, traded, and so things from, Lebanon or Iraq or Turkey got to Japan. Things, and the Japanese really enjoyed that when that kind of road was open. At various times in history, they really enjoyed that. They wanted that, but Korea could close the road if they wanted. And if times when they were angry at Japan about the pirate attacks and other issues, and sometimes they did, and Japan would get angry about this. Of, hey, trade with us, open up, accept our ships. And if the Koreans didn't, Japan was angry. So, these problems. The biggest thing that happened, the Indian War. This is the first time that Japan tried to take over Korea. Mr. Sunshine Drama is showing the second time. Okay, this is the first time, 1592. Japan, at that time, had become a military superpower with 200 years of civil war. 200 years where Japanese just fighting each other. They got a super ability with every man trained, well trained in the bow and arrow and the swords. They had the best swords in the world made of Edo steel, the famous samurai swords. And they developed even bigger and better ships for going between the Japanese islands. And they developed a whole culture of warfare. And by this time, by the end of the 1500s, Japan had the strongest military in the world. Number one. Better than China's. Such. Maybe the Spanish at that time were number two. Spain and such. Japan was number one in the world, actually. They even had guns. They got guns from the Portuguese, and they learned how to make their own guns. Early primitive guns to shoot bullets, and they had thousands of them. Very effective. So, they invaded Korea. Shogun Hideyoshi, a military dictator of Japan, not emperor. Japanese emperor actually had no power for 1,000 years. No power at all. Japan was run by military dictators and big noble families like the Fujiwara for 1,000 years. Now he was military dictator. He invaded peaceful Joseon Korea. Korea in the Joseon dynasty, the early Joseon dynasty, is the third golden age of Korea, and it was a time of peace. Koreans were just the opposite from the Japanese. While Japanese were fighting each other and building military skill and great weapons, Koreans were doing philosophy, which is why on the money you have philosophical people, Taegye and Yulguk, and even King Sejong, and fairly peaceful characters who were doing Chinese poetry and landscape paintings of philosophy of the Neo-Confucianism and such. And Koreans didn't even like the military, not a military people at all. Koreans used to have a saying at this time that the gentleman does not get his hands bloody, does not get blood on his hands. It's a low-class thing to do. Killing other people, it's like killing chickens and pigs. It's a low-class thing to do, and the gentleman does not. A very peaceful culture, which was very wonderful and very nice. It's great to have a peaceful culture. We should have more of those in the world today. But Japan was not. And suddenly, Mr. Hideyoshi sent 150,000 samurai, virtually destroyed Korea, or cut right through Korea. Easy victories, straight on through. And Korea's made many movies about this too, showing themselves very heroic and such, but still. The Japanese had a pretty easy time getting right up here to Seoul within 30 days. 3 different Japanese armies, they just raced each other. They had a competition who could get to Seoul first. It was really so easy for them, and such came through. But then the Ming Dynasty of China sent some of their army to Korea. They didn't wait for the Japanese to come to China. They sent army to Korea to help. It was older brother, younger brother relationship. They were going to help their younger brother. They both didn't like Japan. They both despised, looked down on Japan. They stood together at this time, the Imjin War. And Koreans were very grateful. Koreans, after the war, Koreans really said, thank you, China. Thank you for helping us out. You're a good older brother. The war ended in 1598, and not because of any victory, but because Hideyoshi died, simply. And the samurai soldiers all went home for his funeral, and they thought they were going to come back to Korea, and they never did. 250 years, they didn't. Okay. Afterwards, hostile isolation, all 3 countries really. Soon after the Imjin War, the Manchuria people conquered China. First of all, they came and invaded Korea and forced Korea to submit. Then they turned and invaded China and actually won. They got through the Great Wall of China and they defeated the Chinese in 1644, just 50 years after this Imjin War. They took over. And remember, they're cousins of the Koreans. The Koreans didn't like them. They didn't celebrate, oh, our cousins are taking over China. They were saying, you shouldn't do that. China is civilization. China has the emperor, the proper emperor, and you are mountain barbarians. You shouldn't be doing that. And what ended up is all 3 countries had bad feelings about each other. The Qing dynasty of China, controlled by the Manchu, and then Korea here, and then Japan. They didn't talk much. They didn't trade hardly at all. There was very little international trade going on. All 3 countries said that foreigners should get the death penalty. Foreigners should be killed if they even come here. No foreigners. We don't want any trade. We don't want any foreign religion, any new ideas, nothing. All 3 countries just stayed rather quiet, isolated with themselves, pretty much, until they couldn't anymore. So there's your background. During this, after the Imjin War, Korea's 3rd golden age was over, but there was a long stretch, nearly 300 years, where Korea was not too good, not too bad. It kind of just stayed the same. There were some technology developments, some new science, and some good philosophy put on by a few people, but society basically stayed the same. We say Joseph's stagnant society, just not much change. Class caste system, which you must understand for the Mr. Sunshine drama in here with this, people just born into their position. If you're born as a nobleman, you're just going to be a nobleman, and you'll marry the daughter of another nobleman, and even the nobles were in different rankings of each other. There was kind of a middle class of farmers and professional artisans, but again, you're stuck with that. If you're a blacksmith, you have a son, he's going to be a blacksmith, he's going to marry another blacksmith's daughter. Farmers were like that, etc. Pottery makers, everybody born into their position and no escape. If you were born very low at the bottom, like our character in Mr. Sunshine, who was the butcher's son in the beginning, a butcher's boy, and Dongme, who was at the very lowest class, and there's no escaping from that. Even if you're very smart and you have ability, you're a man of leadership and ability, like Dongme in the drama, you can't escape. You're stuck in your system. This was very frustrating in Korea. There was a fair amount of violence and conflict because of this. Low-class people who wanted just a fair chance, but the nobility would just crush them. Nobility could be stupid and could be criminal and wrong, but they were still nobility. They remain that way. No social mobility. This is very damaging for any country if they do this, as it was for India. And it does not help. Also, that women had no human rights under the Joseph.